In this story, a young man named Jason Carter grew up in a small American town where dreams often died under the weight of routine and fear. He had talent, he could paint emotions into life, but like many, he traded his passion for comfort, taking a desk job he hated just to pay the bills. Days blurred into months, and his heart quietly dimmed. But one cold winter morning, after losing a close friend to a sudden accident, Jason stood before the mirror and saw a reflection of regret staring back. That day, he made a decision that would change everything. He quit his job, sold his car, and moved to a cabin in Colorado with nothing but his brushes and a vision. His hands trembled with doubt, but his soul finally breathed. With each canvas, Jason painted not just art, but freedom, resilience, and truth. His story isn't about overnight success. It's about rediscovering purpose, fighting inner fear, and realizing that life is too short to live on autopilot. If you're waiting for the perfect moment, remember, the perfect moment is now. Months passed, and Jason's name began to quietly echo through local galleries and online communities. People didn't just admire his paintings, they felt them. Each brushstroke told the story of a man who refused to let life pass by. One evening, after an emotional exhibit in Denver, a teenage girl approached him with tears in her eyes and said, "Your art saved me from giving up." That single sentence struck deeper than any paycheck ever had. Jason realized he wasn't just painting for himself anymore, he was giving others permission to dream again. He started hosting free workshops for struggling youth, teaching not just technique, but the courage to believe. For the first time, Jason wasn't running from life, he was running toward it. And in that journey, he discovered the truth: when you stop wasting your life, you start inspiring others to live theirs fully. One day, Jason received an unexpected letter. It was an invitation to speak at a major art and life conference in New York. At first, fear crept back in. He wasn't a public speaker, he was just a man who'd chosen to stop hiding. But deep down, he knew this was another chance to push beyond limits. Standing on that stage, looking into the eyes of thousands, Jason didn't speak with polished words, he spoke from his scars, his failures, his awakening. "You don't need permission to live a meaningful life," he told them. "You just need a reason and the courage to begin." The crowd rose in a standing ovation, not just for Jason's story, but for the truth it unlocked inside each of them. And as he walked off that stage, smiling through the roar of applause, Jason knew he hadn't just changed his life, he had sparked a movement. Following his speech, Jason's inbox overflowed with messages from around the world, strangers thanking him for waking up something inside them. A retired teacher picked up her forgotten poetry, a single mother started her own business, a lonely veteran began to paint again. Jason realized that purpose wasn't found in one moment, but in choosing, every single day, not to waste life. He launched a project called the Wake Up Mission, a traveling art and story tour across America, where he shared real stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things simply because they chose not to give up. From small towns in Kansas to bustling streets in Los Angeles, his mission became a wildfire of hope. What began as a personal journey had turned into a national movement, one bold decision at a time. And still, Jason reminded himself and others every morning, don't waste your life, it's the only story you truly own. As the Wake Up Mission grew, Jason began collaborating with schools, prisons, and rehabilitation centers, bringing his message to places where hope often felt forgotten. In a dusty Texas school gym, a teenager who had planned to drop out stood up after Jason's talk and said, "Maybe my life isn't over yet." In a prison art class, a man serving a life sentence whispered, "I feel free when I create." These moments reminded Jason why he started, not for fame, not for followers, but for impact. The road wasn't always easy. There were nights he slept in his van, days when doubt returned like a shadow. But each time, he remembered how far he'd come from that lifeless desk job and how many lives had shifted because he chose to live with intention. Jason knew the journey was far from over, and as he watched the sun rise over another unfamiliar town, he smiled and said to himself, "This is what it means to truly live." One autumn morning in Seattle, Jason stood in front of a mural painted by local youth as part of his outreach: bold colors, broken chains, and the words, "My life has value." Tears welled in his eyes. He had once been the man who felt invisible, replaceable. Now, his pain had become a platform, his choices a compass for thousands. News outlets began covering his story. From lost to leader, one headline read, But Jason didn't care for fame, he cared for impact. He started writing a book, Don't Waste Your Life, part memoir, part call to action. Letters flooded in, stories of change, second chances, healed families. Yet through all the noise, he stayed grounded, remembering the moment in front of that mirror, the moment it all began. And now, with the world watching, Jason made a promise: as long as there's breath in me, I will remind people that they matter. The book Don't Waste Your Life became more than a bestseller, it became a lifeline. Schools added it to their curriculum, recovery centers used it for healing, and strangers carried it like a personal letter written just for them. Jason was invited to speak at the White House, where he shared how one decision to stop wasting his life ignited a chain reaction of purpose. Standing at that podium, he didn't wear a suit or speak with rehearsed perfection. He wore a simple jacket, paint still stained on the sleeves, and spoke with the same raw honesty that changed his life. "Success isn't what you earn," he said. "It's what you give. And the greatest gift you can give the world is the best version of you." As the room erupted in applause, Jason looked upward, not for praise, but in gratitude. His journey had proven one thing: your story only ends the moment you stop writing it. Years later, Jason founded the Live Bold Academy, a non-profit center built on the grounds of an old, abandoned factory in Detroit, a symbol of rebirth from ruin. The academy offered free creative programs, mental health support, and mentorship for those who had been told they'd never make it. People came from across the country, broken, uncertain, but hungry for a second chance. And Jason greeted each one with the same words that had once saved him: "You are not too late. Your life still matters." One evening, walking through the academy halls, he paused at a wall filled with framed photos, smiling faces of those whose lives had been transformed. He saw his younger self in them, not in looks, but in the fire that now lit their eyes. Jason smiled, placing a hand on his heart. He knew his mission would live on in them. Because the greatest legacy is not what you build, but who you awaken. One crisp evening, as the sun dipped below the Detroit skyline, Jason stood on the rooftop of the Live Bold Academy, watching hundreds of students gather below for the annual Light Up the Night event, a celebration of stories reclaimed, talents rediscovered, and lives no longer wasted. One by one, lanterns filled the sky, each one carrying a personal message: "I choose to begin, I forgive myself, this is my time." Jason's heart swelled with quiet pride. Not because he had all the answers, but because he had dared to ask the right questions. In that moment, a young girl tugged his sleeve and asked, "Mr. Jason, do you think I can change the world too?" He knelt down, looked her in the eyes, and said, "You already are. The moment you believe in yourself, the world begins to change." And as the night sky lit up with dreams, Jason knew this was never just his story. It was ours. Years kept passing, but the fire within Jason never dimmed, it only grew deeper, quieter, and stronger. He had become a symbol of something rare in the modern world: authentic purpose. His story was now being taught in universities, adapted into films, and passed on in whispered conversations between fathers and sons, mothers and daughters, mentors and students. But Jason never let it go to his head. He spent more time listening than speaking, often sitting beside the broken, the lost, the overlooked, because he knew, better than anyone, that greatness is born in those quiet, invisible places. One snowy morning, sitting alone in the academy's garden with a journal in hand, Jason wrote a simple line: "If today was my last day, I'd be proud of how I lived." That was the victory. Not money, not fame, but peace. And still, the world kept calling, stories kept unfolding, and lives kept changing, because one man had once looked in the mirror and said, "No more wasting time." That spring, something unexpected happened. A young man named Eli arrived at the academy angry, bitter, convinced life had nothing left for him. He reminded Jason of his younger self, lost in the noise, drowning in doubt. Instead of lectures, Jason gave him space. Instead of answers, he offered art. Slowly, Eli began to open up, first with silence, then with sketches, and finally, with words. He wrote, "I don't want to die invisible." Jason placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "Then start living deliberately." Months later, Eli became one of the Academy's most inspiring mentors, proving once again that purpose is contagious. Jason watched as others, like Eli, stepped into their own light, becoming guides for the next wave of dreamers. He no longer needed to be the voice, he had become the spark. The movement no longer depended on Jason, it had outgrown him. And that, he realized, was the point. He had planted seeds. Now the forest was growing. Years rolled on, and Jason, now older with silver in his hair but still fire in his eyes, sat on the porch of the academy he once dreamed into existence. Across the yard, generations gathered, students who had become mentors, artists who had once been addicts, leaders who had once stood on the edge of giving up. The air buzzed with laughter, hope, and purpose. A reporter asked him, "Jason, after everything you've built, what's your proudest achievement?" He smiled gently, gazing out at the lives lit up by courage and second chances. "My proudest achievement," he said, "is that I didn't waste my life, and because of that, thousands of others chose not to waste theirs." In that moment, it became clear, his story was no longer just about a man who changed his own life. It was about a ripple that became a wave that became a tide, and a tide that was still rising. Because when one life wakes up, millions can follow. On the 25th anniversary of the Live Bold Academy, Jason took the stage one final time, not as a celebrity, not as a hero, but as a man who had lived every day with meaning. The auditorium was packed, students, teachers, families, and leaders from around the world who had all been touched by his journey. He held the microphone, paused, and simply said, "I was once just a man who almost gave up. But I didn't. And that changed everything." The crowd fell silent, hanging on every word. Then he looked to the front row, where Eli now sat beside his own students, where former addicts were now counselors, where once forgotten lives had become shining examples of what's possible when someone decides enough is enough. Jason raised one hand and whispered with quiet strength, "You don't need a perfect plan. You just need a reason to begin. Don't wait. Don't settle. And above all, don't waste your life." The lights dimmed. The applause rose. But Jason didn't hear it as an ending. He heard it as a promise that even after him, the story would go on. After the celebration, Jason stepped outside into the cool night air, the sound of applause fading behind him. He looked up at the stars, brilliant, endless, and quietly burning. For a moment, he stood in stillness, remembering that young version of himself, trapped in routine, afraid to take the first step. And now, he had lived a life that echoed beyond his own heartbeat. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. A message from a teenager across the country read, "I watched your story. Today, I chose to live. Thank you." Jason smiled. That was the legacy, not the buildings, not the books, but the unseen, unstoppable change spreading through people he'd never even met. He tucked his hands in his pockets and began walking, no destination, just forward. Because even now, with all he had done, Jason knew one thing with certainty: the journey never truly ends when you're living with purpose. As Jason walked through the quiet streets that night, he passed by a mural painted by students from the academy, a rising sun breaking through storm clouds, with bold letters that read, "This life is yours. Don't waste it." He paused, touched the edge of the wall, and felt something deeper than pride. It was peace. He had no regrets, no unfinished dreams, only a heart full of gratitude. Behind him, a group of young volunteers laughed as they loaded supplies into a van marked Live Bold Outreach. They didn't notice Jason watching, but that was the beauty of it. The mission had outgrown him. It had become a movement powered by people who believed in their own worth because one man once dared to believe in his. Jason turned and walked on, the city lights glowing around him like echoes of the countless lives he helped ignite. And somewhere, in a small town, in a quiet room, another soul sat alone, watching his old video, hearing those words again, "Don't waste your life." And just like that, another story was about to begin. Years later, Jason's name was etched not just in books or buildings, but in the hearts of those he helped awaken. The Live Bold Academy continued to thrive under new leaders, many of whom once walked through its doors as broken souls and left as beacons of light. Jason, now retired, spent his final years painting in a quiet cabin by a lake, surrounded by letters from people whose lives had changed because of a single message: "Don't waste your life." One peaceful morning, with the sunrise casting gold across the water, Jason closed his journal after writing just one final line: "I lived fully. I gave everything. And I would do it all again." He passed away that same day, peacefully, with a soft smile on his face. At his memorial, thousands gathered, not to mourn, but to celebrate. Stories were shared, tears fell, and laughter echoed. His story had ended, but his impact lived on. Because Jason proved something timeless and powerful. You don't need to be famous to change the world. You just need to live like your life matters, because it does. Lesson from the story. Your life is a one-time gift, unrepeatable, irreplaceable, and full of unseen potential. This story teaches us that it's never too late to change, to begin again, or to follow the quiet voice inside that says, you were made for more. You don't need to have all the answers or a perfect plan. You just need to take the first step, refuse to live on autopilot, and commit to becoming the best version of yourself. The moment you stop waiting and start living with intention, you not only transform your own life, you inspire others to rise, too. The greatest tragedy is not failure, it's never trying. The greatest success is not fame, it's living with purpose. So whatever you do, don't waste your life. Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more inspirational and life-changing stories. Your support helps us reach more hearts and remind others that it's never too late to start living with purpose. Don't forget to comment below what part of Jason's journey inspired you the most. Thank you for watching, and remember, don't waste your life. The end.